Welcome back in, Geico Outkick Studios. Appreciate all of you hanging out with us. We are joined now by a guy who knows a little something about fighting, Jorge Masvidal, who has been all over the UFC and beyond. Jorge, I appreciate you getting up early with us this morning. First of all, I want to start with this. I saw a story. I don't know if it's true. Your dad, I believe, was from Cuba, and he tried to escape and ended up in the Virgin Islands on a raft. What is that story exactly?
It's a good one. So my dad decided that Cuba wasn't going to dictate its favorite color, what profession he'd have in life, and the amount of food he'd eat per day. So he decided at a very young age that he'd take off. And he got kind of lucky. His older brothers had attempted before, and they had all failed. So he had a best friend, and that best friend had an uncle. And they were able to find a tire tractor that was left behind. It was like a broken-down tire tractor. They got the inner lining from it. They did whatever makeshift they did. And one of the older guy, the one that was running the operation, was like an experienced fisherman and spear fishing guy. And he used to, like, in Cuba, they could make miracles happen over there. I mean, you got these cars from, like, the 60s still running in 50s. So they're very resilient on their feet. So they made the raft, and they made these water containers that they would take out sea. And they took off. The only problem was that on day 2, their water got contaminated. So they were at sea another, 5 days in total, 6 or 7 days. And on, second day, that's it. They didn't have no water. So my dad told me how dehydrated and how broken down he got there as a human being. He said he was pretty close to death by the time they saved him,
And where did he end up?
In the Virgin Islands. And then he got extradited to the U.S., where he began his journey in America.
That's an incredible story. Have you ever been to Cuba yourself at all?
No, my dad's prohibited me from going there. There's not too many things he's given me a hard no on. This was one of them, And it still wasn't like I couldn't go there, but he just told me he didn't when things started loosening up with Cuba that Americans could go over there. He one of the first things he told me was, "You're going to be helping out the communist government. If you go over there, and I would appreciate it, you wouldn't, because that's what I ran from." So I took it to heart, and I've never been.
You grew up in Miami, and I love, first of all, the city of Miami. We were down there for the Super Bowl. It's such a vibrant, incredible place. But there are so many people in South Florida who have seen or have had family members experience what you talked about, which is seeing the cold, hard hand of communism, socialism, not allowing people to have freedoms. A lot of people in America who were born and raised here, myself, other people listening to us right now, don't know what not having freedom is like. How much did your dad instill upon you as you were growing up, how fortunate you were to be in the United States as opposed to Cuba or where he had grown up?
I mean, it was instilled in me from knee high, just like I instilled it in my son, where he knows very well where his grandpa came from and the struggles, and he doesn't quite understand everything yet. He's 5 years old, but he knows certain things. And not just my father, My father was one person that escaped, but every family member that came from Cuba has a story about it. None of their stories were easy. If they didn't defect to a South American country or Mexico, or they risked their life to get over there. My cousin, her left breast is missing because between Cuba and Guantanamo Bay, it's a field of dynamite and landmines, which they know, and obviously the Communist Party is so cool and people want to stay there so bad that they have to rig it with dynamite so everybody could stay, It's so amazing. And she risked her life to get over, and in the process lost her left breast. Thank goodness she didn't bleed to death. They were able to bring her over to the other side, and then, she's in America now. She's the strongest Trump supporter you've ever met, and she's a Latin American person.
We're talking to Jorge Masvidal, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But when you grow up as someone who has stories like that in your family history, how much does that factor in with how tough you are as an athlete yourself to prove that your family has been through so much already? What happens in an octagon doesn't necessarily seem like it's the highest level of competition, right? Does that ever factor in your head as you're training or as you're pursuing your craft as a fighter?
Oh, I mean, you just stole the words right out of my mouth. It's different battles, I'd be a big coward, I think, to set C with guys that, never had done that before, never had had crossed that amount of water ever. I don't know. I want to say that I'd be brave at the moment and do it, but you just don't know till you get there. So it's something that I'm always like, man, you're another level of badass. They call me all types of names and cool acronyms, but to me that's another type of legend status.
You mentioned
people that are walking a line that if you're willing to risk yourself and walk on these mines or try to outsmart them, you're playing with death. It must be that whatever's behind you is so bad that you're willing to risk your life or limbs. It's mind blowing.
We're talking to Jorge Masvidal, one of the most famous UFC fighters of them all. And you mentioned it a little bit. You obviously have Cuban ancestry. I believe your mom was Peruvian. You are a huge supporter of the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and you have been on a bus tour all over Florida supporting him. You hear some people say, oh, the president is racist against Hispanic people, against black people. What has your experience been like with the Trump administration, and how would you respond to people who make those criticisms?
I don't know. The same people that make those criticisms, when you ask them, so point out something that's racist, it's muzzled. It's a lot of feelings, not actual facts. Like I can tell you an actual fact about Joe Biden and the crime bill that directly affected my community, the Latin community. I could tell you how he's called African Americans super predators. I've never heard Trump call my people that. They did some sound bites and changed up things and said that he called Mexicans all types of names. But he was talking about MS-13 gang members. They take commas and remove them out of the sentences and reloop them how they want. But from what I've seen, I wouldn't be with somebody racist. I'm not a white dude with blonde hair and blue eyes. I'm not a white supremacist. I wouldn't be voting for somebody that I thought was associated with that in any way.
It's fascinating.
Capacity. I don't care.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Sometimes the power of the media, and I'm sure you've seen it too, in that they can...
I'm getting all types of things from my own Latin fans that they think I'm racist or that I've sold out because I got money now. Quite the contrary. Trump isn't giving me a penny to say any of these things. This is what I'm seeing from myself. This is what I'm seeing in my own eyes. Biden, under the Biden administration, he deported more Latins than any other president in history. Twice. He did that twice. More than Trump still has deported. So I don't get it. How are you going to call Trump racist when this man has clearly done certain things,
There are a lot of... Yeah, there are a lot of athletes who speak out in favor of Joe Biden or Democrats against Donald Trump. There are not as many athletes in general, although there are some that speak out in favor of Trump. And you mentioned some of the criticism that you might get for speaking out in favor of the president. Why do you think athletes in general are not as outspoken supporting the president as they are criticizing him?
I don't know. I don't know. I get confused in there. Maybe some of them haven't traveled outside of the country. Maybe some of them just don't know. Maybe some of them have lost touch with reality. See, I've had humble beginnings and I've stayed humble throughout my career. I started making rather large amounts of money towards the end of my career. Some of these guys are $20 million in their pocket when they're like 21, 22 years old. They're a little bit out of touch with reality, I think, sometimes. Some of them. I don't want to speak for all of them. I just don't know. But I can tell you, like, the ones that speak well of socialism and communism, they haven't lived those lives or know things like that. I don't want to mention names, but there's a couple guys out there that be advocating for that. And I just don't get it. Why don't you go to that country? Why don't you go you'll go there and visit, and these people love to go to these places because their economy is so destroyed that your dollar's $1,000 over there. So you think that's like a good vacation place, but you wouldn't want to live in these socialist places. You just want to go there on vacation, stop on the cruise ship, and buy some souvenirs, No,
it's interesting, and I'm going to mention a name because we've talked about him on this program. As a guy with Cuban ancestry, and whose family has dealt with the Castro administration, as many people who are listening to us in South Florida know all too well, when you see a guy like Colin Kaepernick praising Fidel Castro and Cuba, and many people in the media don't even say a word to speak out against that, what does that sound like to you as someone who knows the real history of Cuba and what has happened to the people who live there?
My mother taught me something, and she said, if you got nothing nice to say, don't say it. But I got nothing nice to say about this individual, really, to tell you the truth. I mean, he wore a Che Guevara shirt in Miami with the amount of press that he gets. Like, he's sending a message like "F you guys," you know. Like Che Guevara, I know to some people he's like this great individual, but he killed family members of mine down the line. He killed friends of my family members. I've heard the horror stories. This guy was a mass murderer. So maybe he did some parts okay of his life, but at the end of the day, he was a mass murderer for a cause. And if you fought against him, and they took you in a field somewhere and murdered you, executed you like you were a dog, and on to the next. And hey, are you going to be part of this party or not? Nope. Boom. I don't think that's the way you should live, you know. And I could be very physical and be an imposing guy, but politics and religion should never be forced on anybody, especially life or death. And that's what this guy did. And Kaepernick praises this guy. I don't understand. It blows my mind. I don't think he's educated on the subject enough, or maybe his teachers in college sold him a dream from that podium that he bought and purchased, because he's never been to these places. He wouldn't dare. You think this guy would go live in Cuba for a month under their conditions, not under some tourists visiting, but under real conditions where you have no water, you got to walk for the water. There's not such a thing as hot water over there. You want to buy food? We'll get in line, wait for like 3 days, and hope that they have some eggs and some bread. And if they ran out, go to the next town and wait another 2-3 days for food, for basic necessities like soaps and razors. You got to wait in the line to get it. What is that? You know, these guys are. It's mind blowing.
We're talking to Jorge Masvidal. Do you think it would be helpful? You mentioned like Americans traveling, but Americans often travel to resorts and they stay inside of gated communities, and there's a nice beach and there's people waiting on them. Do you think it would be helpful if Americans had to really see how the rest of the world lives so that we would take less for granted the advantages that we have in this country?
I think so, but definitely in school. You know, I'm seeing this massive movement towards what it feels like anti-America. You know, like what I'm hearing kids talking about since a young age. So they're getting our kids young. They've sent their intellectuals from communist parties, and I feel this way especially because I'm from South Florida, where we got Venezuela, we got Cuba, we got a lot of Eastern Europeans. We don't know if they're sending their intellectuals over here to indoctrinate our kids since a young age. Like, we don't know. There should be like some system in place that's teaching the young kids at an early age what socialism is, what it's led to 100 million deaths and counting. You know, it's mind-blowing.
Jorge, I mean, I appreciate you coming on. I feel like we could spend a lot of time with you. For people out there who are interested in what you're saying and what you're doing, what would you tell them to do?
Be diligent on your research. It's your future. It's your life. You don't have to listen to anything I said. Go fact-check everything I said. But just go out there and really seek the truth, you know. Look at bills. Look who passed bills. Look who's done what for what people. You know, my father always tell me that one way that they used to just watch the population over there was what you saw on TV, because there was like 3 channels on TV, and it was controlled by the Communist Party. We're looking at TV channels now, and we're seeing, wow, they lean one way so damn hard they don't even say the truth. They don't cover these riots, people dying, losing their lives because they're trying to open up businesses or not have their businesses vandalized. It's crazy. So just do your own diligent research and homework and find the truth. We're
talking to Jorge Masvidal. Last question for you. When will you fight again?
We're working on February, but nothing's promised yet. There's no name yet either. We're just kind of figuring out also when this corona thing's going to end, so we could also cash in on the live gauge. So we're just sitting back waiting on details, dates, and numbers.
I appreciate the time, my man. We'll talk to you again, and thank you for spending some time with us this morning.
Yes, sir. God bless, man. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. That's Jorge Masvidal, UFC fighter, reached out and wanted to come on the show. Fantastic. I mean, that is – I am utterly fascinated, as many of you know. We talked a while ago with Armando Salguero about people who have experienced living in Cuba, or their families have, and the way they respond to the idea of communism or socialism is totally different than the way that you or I, who've been fortunate to have grown up in America and not have any experience with that at all. I mean, just an incredibly fascinating way to look at the world because of your own life experience. We need to get Jorge Masvidal on here again.